The aim of this video is to introduce the structure of the AQA ISAs. AQA provide a glossary that should be shared with students, as it uses a lot of the key terms that the questions in the ISA will use. The teacher will provide the context, and they will outline the problem or the practical that will be investigated. In additional science, students need to provide their own hypothesis, and they will research 2 possible methods to investigate it and develop a detailed plan for one of those methods. They will write up their plan in the first part of the ISA and then will carry out their own investigation, provided it is workable, safe and manageable. Alternatively, a method can be provided that all students can follow. Section 1 of the ISA will have various different questions about their research and plan. After they have completed Section 1, it is then that they will carry out the experimental work and process their results. In Section 2 of the ISA, they will analyse their results, and they will also use a data sheet where they look at other results and compare this to the outcomes of their experimental work. As part of the planning, students must carry out a risk assessment. The planning is described as limited control, and so this can be carried out in class. However, Section 1 is described as high control, and this needs to be done under exam conditions. In Section 1, students are asked to produce a table, and this should be attached to the Section 1 paper. Students are allowed to produce 1 A4 side of their own research notes on the candidate research notes sheet, which we will look at in a moment. The practical work is also under limited control and can be done either individually or in pairs or groups. Section 2 again is under high control under exam conditions, as this is where students will analyse their results. Students must produce a graph, and they are not allowed to take this away with them. These graphs must be collected at the end of the lesson and attached to Section 2. Students may come up with a variety of methods in their Section 1 planning. However, there is always a method produced in the teacher notes, and this can be supplied by the teacher to students in order to carry out the practical. Students will complete their candidate research notes, and they are allowed to use this in the exam conditions sections of the ISA. The front sheet needs completing and signing and dating. The next sheet is where students will write their own hypothesis for additional science, list their research sources, and start to describe the method that they might be using. We'll look at this in more detail in the training session. Here is where they'll also identify any risk assessment issues, and this is where they will note down the context that has been provided by the teacher. Students have up to 45 minutes to sit Section 1. Section 1 will always include a question on what were the 2 most useful sources and why they were the most useful. Section 1 will also ask students to write their own hypothesis and explain why they made this hypothesis at additional science. There is always a 9-mark method question where they use their candidate research notes to state equipment, how they will use the equipment, measurements, making it a fair test, and a risk assessment. Question 4 will vary, as certain questions are included in rotation, and we'll look at these during the training. Candidates will always be expected to include a table for Section 1 though. In Section 2, candidates are allowed 50 minutes. There is often a question about what conclusion they can make and making a link using any patterns in their data. Again, other questions appear in rotation, and we'll look at these in the training. Another common question is about whether candidates got any anomalous results. In Section 2, they should often be quoting data from their investigation. There is always a sketch graph question where they will use a case study to sketch a graph. Similarly, there is often a question looking at the case studies that are provided in the data sheet and whether these support or contradict the student's own hypothesis or a given hypothesis. There's often more than one question, about looking at case studies from the datasheet and whether these support or contradict student hypotheses. The final question will always be based on the student's graph, and they can be awarded up to 4 marks for the graph.